All right, Doug, I think we're live. So welcome back. This is our second live stream now, a couple days in a row. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm fine. Fine and dandy, as George Carlin liked to say. Fine and dandy.
What does dandy mean exactly?
Well, Carlin really loved playing with words, and he kind of examined that and didn't come up with a good conclusion as to where that came from. Fine and dandy.
Oh, yeah, I have no
But
idea.
I guess some people still say it, but why do they say it? Habit or momentum, or we do a
No,
lot of things that don't make
I've,
sense.
yeah, that's true. We do say a lot of things that don't make sense. I bought a couple books on etymology just to try and understand some of the weird phrases that we come up with. I mean, there was one shared by John sent us the list of all those things, what it meant to be dirt poor and not a pot to piss in and all that, the
Yeah, right,
origination of
right.
those phrases. It's
Yeah.
really actually they're pretty amazing, some of those phrases. So
Yeah. And of course, reading Grimm's fairy tales and the origins of nursery rhymes and things like that that take you back to a not a very much kinder and gentler era when they were put together.
no, those actually it's crazy. You read some of those stories to kids because they're actually terrifying, you know,
Yeah.
like at night times it's weird.
Yeah, they've really been homogenized. And I just read a snippet that I'm going to investigate. Everybody is familiar with Peter Benchley's book, Jaws, or perhaps not his book Jaws, but the movie Jaws, which came out about 50 years ago. Maybe it was yesterday or today, 50 years ago. And I remember it well. It was especially that opening scene with the shark was really just excellent, where the girl goes swimming and the shark attacks her. But and I've got to because I haven't read the book. Everybody's seen the movie or should see the movie, I think. And it points out that Benchley's book was extremely misanthropic, where he was trying to show that all the characters were horrible and the shark was the only good guy in the movie. But
Really?
well, that's what so I've got to look into it. I said, gee, this is interesting because not having read the book, because the movie didn't portray it that way at all. So
No, not at all.
things do get modified over time. It was Steven Spielberg, I guess, and
Yeah,
that could have been his first big movie, if I'm correct that it was. Yes.
I think so. I think so. Well, we'll take some questions from people over the course of this, but there are a couple of topics I thought we could discuss. But first, I think it's worth delving into the Encyclopedia Britannica if there's anything that stood out to you today.
Yeah. This is actually quite amazing when you think about it. It was in 1933 that they started construction, this day in 1933, they started construction of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Hmm.
And I don't know if people think about this very much, but this was 90 years ago. That's a long time already. And the challenges of putting that bridge together along quite a wide strait with the largest span being 4,000 feet and the towers being 700 feet above the water line. I mean, and having to build the foundations for this, blasting underwater, finding the bedrock, and then stabilizing it, because of course San Francisco is a known earthquake zone, so that it could stand up to not only the high winds, but earthquakes, uh, and building it under those circumstances with currents, these huge towers and a 4,000 foot span with notoriously wild currents, bad weather, fog, which doesn't help if you can't see anything when you're trying to build. Uh, I mean, to me, it's absolutely shocking that they were able to do this 90 years ago. It's on the scale of the pyramids. And also, I don't know when the Empire State Building started, but it was about now, in the 19, 1929, 30. I could look it up. But, equally fantastic construction project done with technology of 90 years ago. And I'm just wondering, other than the space program and, well, things like the CERN lab in Switzerland and things like that, but I wonder if the rate of progress has slowed down looking at what they did.
I think so, Doug. I mean, I try and think of the major infrastructure projects that I've witnessed in my life started and finished. And the only, I was living in Boston when they were in doing the big dig during part of it. I mean, it expanded way beyond when it was supposed to, but that was actually not that big of a project, even though it was very disruptive. It doesn't seem nearly as big as the Golden Gate Bridge. Maybe I'm wrong, but and then there was the interstate bridge spanning Iowa and Illinois. This I-74 bridge was replaced, over the last 10 years. Other than that, I haven't really seen anything impressive built at all in my lifetime.
Nor have I. And when you drive down an interstate, uh, it seems whenever they do, well, in any of the cities, wherever there's road work and repair, it lasts for years. I don't know why. I've never been able to figure that out. Why does it take years in order to make, where they have these guys standing around hanging signs, collecting what, I don't know what they get, $25, $30 an hour for flagging cars? Years. So yeah, has the rate of change of actual physical progress slowed down? Maybe science is continuing to expand, but things that we see in front of us, maybe not.
Yeah, Peter Thiel had this famous thing. He said, we were promised flying cars and all we got was 180 characters or something like that.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Well, yeah, it was some years ago, uh, I pointed out what I thought, and I put together this list of a dozen things that make Western civilization totally unique, different from any other civilization, whatever their merits. The Chinese civilization, the Indian civilization, yeah, sure. As I pointed out, I love General Cho's chicken, and I love Mugu Gai Pan and martial arts and yoga. Great contributions. But compared to everything else in the world, which is all the product of Western civilization, they really don't count for much. And all these people that are part of the DEI movement are actively, purposefully trying to destroy Western civilization itself. And these 12 factors that I put together, starting with free thought as a good thing, something you want, free speech as a good thing that you promote, and 10 other things, they're trying to wash it away. So yeah, maybe we're right that, the artifacts of Western civilization, we're not building as many recently.
well, and I think part of that could be the lack of awareness or understanding people have of what created our current reality. I mean, I shared this tweet I saw the other day with you where it was some tech bro who is involved in AI. Yeah, I guess he's got his own, company, startup in AI. And he was showing a chart of GDP basically since, the birth of Christ, since 2000 or since, since the birth of Christ, all the way up until recently. And you see this hockey stick that takes place, right around 1900, maybe a little bit before that, you start to see an incline, but it really takes off then. And he said he couldn't figure out why that was. And he said the more he thought about it, the more dismayed he was that, why humans are basically the same as we were 200,000 years ago. Why is it that, modern way of life didn't come into being sooner? And he just couldn't put together what might be some obvious reasons for that. And this is a very educated person, and all the replies to it. were also educated people hypothesizing about different things. I mean, one guy was saying, it takes a lot of REM sleep for brains to be creative. And so, without enough agriculture stuff, people don't have enough calories, so they weren't getting enough REM sleep. And all these really bizarre conclusions people had along the way. I mean, one was like, well, it's population caused it. But no, actually, it's something that caused population to explode higher in productivity. They don't understand the connection between those two. So
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, Colonel, who was it that drilled that commercially produced oil in Pennsylvania? It's
Rockefeller.
actually a little bit 1840s, 1850s, I think. Colonel, what was his name anyway? But it took a long while for the oil thing to start ramping up and being usable. But yeah, that's right. It was oil. And it's a physical thing. And since everybody has been taught to hate fossil fuels, which I think is the wrong way to phrase it. You shouldn't call them fossil fuels. That does make them sound evil. I mean, it's like we're digging up the bodies of dead dinosaurs. It's kind of ghoulish. We should call them hydrocarbons, which is what they actually are, hydrocarbons, or if you wish, liquid hydrocarbons, because coal works pretty well too, and that helped. But yeah, it's they hate these things and they don't want to acknowledge it. And of course, nuclear should have taken it to the next level. If these morons wanted an electrical society, nuclear power would allow it to happen. But
Right.
it ain't going to happen with windmills and solar panels. It's simply impossible to run an industrial civilization with current technology or anything like it on those things. So, yeah, it was oil. Right. It was
Yeah.
oil. That's the biggest damn thing. And that makes Rockefeller, uh, notwithstanding what his progeny did and what his foundation did. And for all I know, he was an awful guy. But that makes him a hero for having promoted oil and making it widely available. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. There was I think it was probably 15 years ago. I was in a publisher meeting for Agora, and Bill Bonner was doing a presentation explaining this, and I had no idea at the time that this was true, that oil, what the difference really made. And I think that the way he described it is that in a single tablespoon of oil is the equivalent work of 40 hours of hard human labor in a tablespoon. And that blew me away. I never forgot that stat since then. And, what I was saying is that, you can debate the numbers, but it's something like in one barrel of oil is the equivalent of 25,000 hours of human work. 25,000 hours. That's just shocking.
Yeah, and it's even worse than it sounds because let's suppose it's 25,000 is the accurate figure. Well, in order to get those 25,000 hours of labor, you have to feed those people and house them and clothe them. And those are costs. So that the surplus value, to use a Marxist term, that's left over after paying for those, or making it possible for those people to put in their 25,000 hours, leaves you very little. So, of course, civilization advanced slowly over all that time. You make
That's
some
right.
innovations, things get better. Yeah. But yeah, it's, people are so ignorant. And then, just the other day, the wife of a good friend of mine down here, we were talking over lunch, and I don't know how it came up. Her son, who's a very bright and sound guy, extremely actually, gave her a copy of Homer's Odyssey. And I forget exactly why he decided to give it to his mother. But I think it had to do with a popular song down here in Argentina called Penelope.
Hmm.
And he explained to her that Penelope was the wife of Odysseus. And so she's trying to go through the book. But here's the point I'm making. This is the foundation of Western literature, Homer. That is the foundation of all Western literature. And it's a great story, fantastic story. And she was totally, I'm an educated woman, really. She didn't know Homer or didn't pay attention if it was taught in a class that she took, or maybe and didn't know who Odysseus was. And I said, well, look, you must know about the Cyclops, the giant with the single eye. That no, no. So the fact that people must live in stranger silos, bubbles than even I imagined. And I have almost no respect for my fellow human beings, the mob, the capita censi, the head count, as the average voter, put it that way. That's what the Romans called, the mob out there, the head count. The hoi polloi is what the Greeks called them. So yeah, I guess most people, but she doesn't need to know all that stuff because she's a successful businesswoman in her own right, making manufacturing leather goods and selling them increasingly throughout Latin America. I think increasingly successfully too. So does she need to know anything about Homer? I guess not. And she certainly wouldn't know anything about the oil thing we were just talking about. But a perfectly delightful person, charming. Well, of course, the Ukraine came up too, and she said, "Yes, I hate Putin," and all the things that she'd heard on CNN. She speaks perfect English, of course, like most upper class Argentines do. So it's situation's pretty hopeless.
Well, I think that's the problem with that. If you're not, I'm a college dropout. I didn't really think there was much value in a lot of the knowledge that you would get in a university at the time. I dropped out and, was trying to make some money. And I started several businesses and didn't know much about anything, learned how to build businesses, but it wasn't until later that I just started to feel stupid for not knowing some basic things. And I started reading history and I started reading more philosophy and all of that. And I think the problem with not having an educated populace where people just don't know basic things is that they become unmoored. That's how whether it's this fanaticism against, some foreign orc, as it's portrayed in the media, or, this belief that oil is destroying Earth. These ideas, all the stuff that we see with the DEI stuff and Harvard. All that kind of can happen when you're rudderless, when you don't have any kind of way to navigate all the stuff, the narratives that are come our way.
Yeah, and yesterday, speaking of that, yesterday I think I read a long tweet from Bill Ackman, who's the multi-billionaire fund manager, Harvard grad, who is kind of single-handedly built a fire under this whole thing with Claudine Gay, the Black woman with the absolutely horrible glasses and the buzz cut hairdo, which is kind of a statement of where she is politically and philosophically, that she shaved her head. Anyway, Ackman came out with this long tweet, saying what he thought was wrong, and it was pretty good. I didn't argue with anything that Ackman wrote, and I guess you could probably look up on Twitter, Bill Ackman, and however you dig these things up. I don't tweet. I just not interested. But so I read the thing, and the problem is yes, he's quite correct that Harvard has got to be cleaned out, and he points out that it's got a gigantic superstructure of administrators and just people getting paid a lot for hanging around, and the professors are earning way too much for what little they do, and on and on. Yes, that's all quite correct. Of course, he goes into that, and then he does a nice little piece on DEI, and he points out, well, this is not a cosmic breakthrough on his point, but it's nice that a guy in his position brought this out, because I've got something on DEI here. It's that he points out that it divides everybody into being either an oppressor or the oppressed, quite correct. And that, these people are trying to, I've got to explain the backstory behind lovey-dovey here. I think some people might be interested. If you own a dog, I think your dog ought to have a history, even if you make up a lot of the history. So I could explain her history and why she's called lovey-dovey. Anyway, he points out safe spaces. That's like a new concept that developed. Whoever heard of safe spaces before? I mean, this isn't a war zone these people are living in. This is the cloister they're living in. You need safe spaces in a cloister. It's crazy. And he points out microaggressions. Yeah, we've heard that and people take this seriously. I mean, this is nuts. I mean, and the other thing he points out is trigger warnings.
Yep.
So yeah, this is all signs of a psychopathology. These are people that are mentally unstable. They're actually nuts. I mean, it's like mass hysteria has taken over the world. So very good on Ackman's part that he points this out, but he doesn't get down to the actual root of the problem. I mean, it's determining what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's, since he's obviously a smart guy and is kind of on the road, maybe he'll dig that up. But, Harvard, and he points out, Ackman points out that Harvard's $50 billion endowment, and when we talked the other day, I thought it was much larger, frankly, I did, because 50 billion is a lot of money, but frankly, it's not a lot of money anymore. Because there was a time, some people might remember this, when the only billionaires were Howard Hughes and John Beresford Tipton. And John Beresford Tipton, in the show in the 50s or 60s, called The Millionaire, where he'd give $1 million to somebody every week and see how they destroyed themselves, which is what they usually did with it. So anyway, hey, $1 billion, that was $1 million was a lot of money. $1 million, you can't even buy a house with $1 million. A lot of places, forget about it. So Ackman points out that Harvard's endowment is $50 billion, which it's not that much money anymore. But he points out that during the greatest bull market in history, that it's compounded itself at only about 4% per year. And he's asking himself, since there are a lot of, very smart graduates that are in the markets, how did they get only 4% for an institution like that? I mean, I'm not talking about blowing yourself up because you speculate in penny stocks, but wait a minute. How did they get, just buying bonds back then and holding onto the bonds, you would have been getting 8%, maybe 12% if you bought them back in 1980 per year. So he's asking himself all these questions. And who was it? Was it Eric Hoffer that said, I got to look this up again because it was a bon mot. He said, all great things start out as a radical thought, an enthusiastic idea, and they devolve into a business. And from a business, they turn into a scam. Words to that effect. And that's pretty much what's happened with Harvard in particular, and higher education or education in general. That's what's happened. It's a scam. It's like the Catholic Church. I mean, I don't know if Jesus didn't found the church. Well, I don't know who the hell knows what happened way back then. But, I don't think it was a scam back in the days when Jesus was preaching. I'm not a Christian or a Jew or a Mohammedan, frankly, for that matter. But anyway, it's turned into a self-licking ice cream cone for many, many centuries. It's a scam.
Scam. Yeah, it's I'm looking up this quote. It says every great cause begins as a movement, becomes a business, and eventually degenerates into a racket.
A racket. And was that Hoffer?
Yep.
Okay, great.
That's good.
So
Hmm.
anyway, it's the second law of thermodynamics. Everything winds down over time. And
Right. When it wouldn't be so painful if it were allowed, if these things were not artificially supported, though, right? Because I mean, the if Harvard were a closed system, it would have degraded already and been replaced by something better, but instead it's supported by the government. It's tax exempt status, which of course everything should be tax exempt, but it gets preferential status. And then all these funded student loans, these federally backed student loans that have been basically made a generation indentured servants to it.
yeah, and there was an article in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago that took a look at Auburn University in particular in Alabama and its budget. And it turns out, perfect example of what Hoffer said, it's that all the money that comes in, they use it to build more buildings. And, dormitories for the students, where they tore down a perfectly acceptable dormitory. These are fucking college kids. Come on. I mean, they're used to sleeping on couches and futons. I mean, and they're putting them up in the equivalent of a Four Seasons hotel to attract them to go there for 4 years of corruption. So, they're spending just billions of dollars for these buildings and hiring, DEI administrators, of which, and I still can't believe it, that the University of Michigan has 165 DEI people. No, the whole system needs to be flushed. Hopefully, this is one thing that just the Greater Depression will put paid to, but we're looking at the collapse of civilization, which is much worse.
That's the downside. In order to get rid of these universities, we're going to have to lose Western civilization for a while, at least.
Yeah, maybe it'll be reconstructed somehow. I don't know, but it'll probably, instead of the Odyssey, it'll probably be reconstructed with this, like this movie I was telling you about before we got on the air called, what was the name of that movie? It's funny.
Sharper.
Where Sharper, yes. Didn't remember the name of the movie because it's not like it was a cosmic breakthrough or anything, but basically it's about a couple of total and absolute scumbag sociopaths, a mother and son team who are really incestuous. They're like boyfriend, girlfriend, mother and son. And they make their living scamming people in the cleverest ways. And so, and of course, they tied race into this thing too, because they find a multi-billionaire. And one way, it doesn't explain the background, but he had a son with a black woman, and the son is kind of alienated and kind of psychologically damaged, quite frankly. And so they find this black girl who's half white, and she's a borderline criminal. She's a junkie and a small-time thief, and they train her up and get her next to this guy. And anyway, it's kind of clever, is that since the old guy is going to die, they wind up making sure that they inherit all this money. Now, there's more to it than this, but in the end, it turns out that the old guy with multi-billion dollars, as they portray him, is a moral scumbag himself. He's just not a lowlife moral scumbag like these two sociopath thieves are, or for that matter, the two black people are. But anyway, so he dies, leaves it all to the mother. And it turns out, I guess this makes it a righteous story, is the two black people, the small-time thief was the girl, and the kind of half crazy guy who's his son, get the billions of dollars. So I guess that's the story.
It's a social justice story then.
It is. So, and it was kind of entertaining because it was cleverly written. But the problem with civilization, what passes for it today, is that it's got no moral foundation, what's right or what's wrong. I mean, I mean, these people weren't, I mean, yeah, you could figure out that they were scumbags, but maybe you'd figure out, gee, these are really clever people who have gotten hold of all that money.
It's a utilitarian philosophy dominating. It's whatever
Yeah,
works.
yeah.
So what do you did you ever watch that show that's on Netflix that Obama was a producer of? Did you ever watch that? Leave the World Behind?
Yes, that was called Leave the World Behind. Yeah, I'm trying to recall the details of it. How did it work out? Oh, I know. It worked out with this girl in the bunker hiding from whatever was going to happen. Do you have a precise of it that you can?
Well, I think that the interesting thing about it is I did read the book before, and the book left a lot more to the imagination. It wasn't clear exactly what happened. You knew that the power went out and there were problems, but it didn't really say exactly what it was. Whereas in this one, in the film, which Obama had his hand in, it was much more clear, that and it led to there was some sort of EMP attack, some kind of war, and ultimately giving you the impression that it was going into civil war, and that was to come still. That's the way it was kind of left. But given the fact that it came from Obama had such a strong hand in it, and explaining, like correcting the author as he's creating the screenplay around it to make sure that things are handled realistically, like how things really would go down if there is a cyber attack or something. That was just ominous, I thought. But
Yeah, it was ominous. It was a collapse of civilization projection. And why did everything start going wrong exactly? What happened? Or did we ever find out why
the
things
the
started
impression that it
falling?
was a cyber attack, because cyber attack.
It was a cyber attack. That's what it
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it could happen. Well, why were the Obamas, in particular, the executive producers, who were the financiers of? It was interesting. A very, very dystopian, dismal, unhappy ending kind of movie.
Yeah, very unsettling, I thought. Very unsettling.
Yeah, it
The
was.
one of the other things that is worth talking about, I think, just quickly at least, is that we talked about the migrant issue several times now, and then the most recent numbers for December are up. So it was like almost 250,000 in November that were apprehended or facilitated through the border in November, and then it was up over 300,000 in December. So in the most recent month, it was up, 50, almost 60,000. Now, James O'Keefe did this quick little expose on Twitter where he went to this facility in Arizona where they're collecting and distributing these migrants. And the organization that it was behind it is the IRC, which is like the International Relief Commission or something like that. And I did some digging on that, as I don't never really heard of them. I was shocked at the people that are behind this thing. I mean, if you were, yeah, for those who might, like me, might believe in a grand conspiracy, this is really further evidence that it might actually be, because strangely enough, the two main people that are on the co-chair of the board of directors, the first one is Tim Geithner. Tim Geithner is the former Treasury Secretary during Obama. Now, why he would be part of this organization, I don't know. It's weird. I mean, he's in finance. And then the co-chair is the current executive vice president and chief corporate affairs officer at Pfizer.
Hmm.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it's a really nice, benevolent corporation, if there ever was one.
Yeah, and everyone else in there. I mean, I just went through the list of people, and it's a lot of people in the Obama administration, people on the National Security Council for Obama. A guy who is the former managing director of the DTCC. Now that's if you guys have read or heard us talk about the Great Taking, hypothesizes that all of the assets in the system will be used as collateral and lost. And the way that happens is through these central clearing parties. And the DTCC is the one in the US where all of these derivatives are traded along with all of your stocks, and the place where all of that stuff would be served up as collateral to support the derivatives complex. So that guy's the treasurer of it. The president and CEO is the foreign is David Miliband. I guess he's the ex-foreign secretary for the UK. And the whole list, all the way down it, is people you would assume are bad actors. I mean, the person who's in the current person in charge of the Rockefeller Foundation is on it. You've got the guy from BlackRock, Larry Fink, is on it. I mean, all the bad guys are here.
Yeah, the best part, you were telling me though about their tax return, which is accessible because foundations file tax returns. So what's the story there? That was really shocking.
It's fun. This is all funded by the U.S. government, primarily U.S. taxpayers. About $500 million they received from the government last year. So all of this process, these guys are in control of this organization that we then support, that is then facilitating the inflow of these migrants. I mean, it's shocking.
Yeah, and that's a huge number of migrants. New York City reported that it costs them $146,000 per year per migrant. I mean, how can it cost? I mean, you can't spend $146,000. That's tax-free money too. What? This is all insane. It really is. It's either a conspiracy or it's mass psychosis, which it could be either or actually could be both.
It could be both, but I think the Eric Hoffer, quote you mentioned earlier plays well here too. Every great cause begins as a movement, becomes a business, and eventually degenerates into a racket. The homeless racket, the migrant racket, the education racket, the healthcare racket. It's all a racket.
Yeah, 300,000 migrants, penniless, per month, coming into the country, being supported. They're wards of the state. So especially the young men that are gathered together are going to do what idle young men always do. They're going to get into trouble. They're going to organize. But that's a lot of people to support every month. And they don't speak the language. They don't share the culture. They're, a racial, at least at the moment, a minority. But that kind of helps bind them together against all these evil white people who hate themselves, incidentally. I'm convinced that the average American white person, not people watching this, I'm sure, they hate themselves and they feel they're guilt-ridden about having stuff, and the poor benighted people in the third world don't have anything. This is a formula. This is a formula for collapse. That's just fascinating to watch. Anyway.
It is. It's interesting to me all the finance people are involved in that organization. Like, what do the bankers have to do with it? I just don't.
It makes you wonder why they're doing this, because they've got to realize that they have a tiger by the tail. And if this gets a little bit out of control, they're going to wind up hung by their heels from lampposts, as they should be, I think. But, you'd think they'd want to just leave well enough alone, being billionaires. I mean, that's a pretty good deal in this society.
It's been a great deal, especially for people who I don't think created a lot of value in the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, let's see if I'm looking at the chat here. We've got a lot of people that have been posting comments. If somebody would like, there's a lot to look at here, but if you have questions for Doug, I will try and find within this list something and forward it along to Doug. So go ahead and ask questions if you got them in the chat. In the meantime, Doug, why don't you tell us about the backstory of the dog?
Oh,
you have to have stories for your dog to say.
Well, I've had dogs my whole life, and since the dogs can't speak, I have to speak for them, is the way I see it. And so I have two sisters here, they both came up and greeted me earlier in sequence. I don't know if you could have seen the first one, second one rather. But the first one, her name is Lovey Dovey, and she's very svelte, kind of a beauty queen. She's a poodle. She's a standard poodle. And since the war has been going on in the Ukraine, my two dogs have taken an interest in it, as you might expect, since it's in the news all the time. And Lovey Dovey is a Ukrainian bar girl because she just loves everybody. She comes up and sidles up to you and wants to be your best friend. And so she's a Ukrainian bar girl. But her sister, the mama poodle, is built like you might imagine a Russian nurse to be built, kind of stocky. And she's a nurse because she always comes up, not in the way that Lovey Dovey does, but she's licking you. And if a dog has a medical problem, all they can do is lick, a wound or whatever. So
Yeah.
she's a frontline war nurse with the Russian army. And you know that because she's licking all the time. And when she got her annual new collar, it was, of all things, a camouflage colored. So now you know for sure that she's associated with the army. So that's one of the things. It's the only thing the two of them argue about is who's the good guy. The people that hang out in the bar where lovey-dovey is the bar girl, or people on the front lines with the Russians where the mama poodle is. So anyway, that's a brief story about them. There are many stories about all my dogs that someday I'd like to write up, but writing stuff is brain damage. I really don't like to write anymore, frankly.
Well, I think Jane took down one of your stories and already put it in children's book form. I don't know if she has worked on any illustrations for it yet, though. But yeah, she'd done that.
What I'm trying to do, I mean, there's a lot to be said for good children's stories, but I think in order to be good, they've got to have a moral lesson. Okay, teach the kids something about the way the world is in the form of animals, with a moral lesson: who's right and who's wrong, who's good and who's evil. And I'm working on what to do with these two characters.
How to turn it into a moral story?
It's got to be a moral story. It can't just be I don't think it should be just a slice of life with no point.
Well, maybe they realize that the real enemy is NATO, and they join forces.
Oh, that's good. Yes, that's that's right. And we can uh, hang bandoliers along them to carry their ammunition. They can put that around their waists and go off
Yeah,
to go off to fight NATO. So
I'm looking. There's
that'd
a
be
lot
nice.
of. I'm looking at questions here. There's people ask. I mean, we kind of already covered that. Joanne says refer to a few earlier question. I can't see it. It's a long time ago. So if you have a question, post it again, please. So someone asked if we're being set up for the Great Reset, if what we see now is what's happening around us. And there really is like the global conflict. We've had the Russia-Ukraine thing going on, but you see a lot of like saber rattling in Korea again now. And you also see issues with obviously with China and the Taiwan Strait, and then with obviously in the Middle East. I mean, how even in Venezuela, even with the discovery of oil there, I know that the SOCOM commander sent some ships down to do some patrols in the area. The U.S. getting involved, the Monroe Doctrine, essentially. So, do you think that all the global conflict is related to the Great Reset?
Hmm. I think that war is the health of the state, something which was said over 100 years ago by Rudolf Steiner, was it? Anyway, it's quite correct. War is the health of the state throughout all of history. I mean, princes were primarily warriors, and what they did for a living was try to steal stuff from the kingdom next door and become richer and become famous. And yeah, of course, the state is your enemy here. The state is not your friend. The state is the enemy of everybody, of every decent human being. So I don't think anything's changed at all, except states have gotten much more powerful than they've ever been in the past. I mean, the state could never steal 50 or 60% of the production of its subjects in the past, because there wasn't that much surplus value, frankly. So they're much more powerful now than they've ever been. And they're bad boys, and they're going to get into trouble.
Do you think that with, this does seem like the economy is just kind of holding together barely. Do you imagine that we talked about this before a long time ago, that what we're going to see is an inflationary, like hyperinflationary event, or a deflationary event, or both?
Nothing has changed. For many, many years, this debate has gone on. Are we going to have a catastrophic deflation like in 1929, or a runaway inflation like Germany in 1923, or both in sequence, or both in different areas of the economy? It's possible that you could have a catastrophic deflation with like mega houses, which a lot of people are, well, it's happened in the past. In the 1930s, they had all these great Gatsby-like houses that were actually abandoned because nobody could afford the servants to maintain them, and it was considered in bad taste to be living like a prince, when people were, standing in line for tubs of sticky soups and that. So yeah, anything and everything can happen. I'm just sure that something is going to happen, especially since we're not, producing things as we were talking earlier on. I mean, big, major, worthwhile things like bridges and tall buildings. Yeah. All our money is going to places like our bases in Iraq, which is what we talked about the other day. If I was a malefactor that wanted to punish the great Satan, or I don't know who, I guess the little Satan is Israel, but I've always liked the analogy of a dog and its master, a vicious dog and its nasty master. And sometimes the dog bites the master, and sometimes the master kicks the dog. But wait a minute, who's the dog and who's the master? We don't know that either. Anyway, I think that's a better analogy. But if I was one of the other side in the Middle East, I would rig something up to take out those 3 or more, who knows how many they really have, bases in Iraq. It'd be easy to overrun them because they're what? I don't know what they're company size. I don't even know. Nobody knows. It's classified information how many soldiers are in these bases in Iraq. But I think they're sitting ducks by.
Yeah, or like we talked about the other day, just taking out one of the ships that are there now by, which it seems like the Houthis can do alone. They don't even need, they don't need an organized military to do it. It doesn't seem.
No, they don't. Just, get a hold of a bunch of these really neat new torpedoes that you really can't defend against, or, a barrage of the various types of drones and missiles that you really can't defend against. And God, if they sunk a destroyer or severely damaged a carrier, now what's the U.S. going to do? It's going to have to do something, otherwise it'll be embarrassing. So it'll find somebody to attack, but exactly who to attack? I mean, it's like attacking in Afghanistan. I mean, there was a bunch of primitive goat herders and camel jockeys running around. And so you run around attacking them and just really pissing people off all over the world. It's like that movie Dances with Smurfs, where they were on the attack the planet with the trees. What was that movie called? Avatar?
Oh, Avatar, yeah. That's was first. I'm
Yeah,
like, what? Okay,
yeah,
yeah, Avatar.
exactly. Yeah, so obviously the US is going to look like the evil military. Well, kind of is attacking the nice, you know, primitive but not ill-intentioned natives. That's the way it'll play down. Just like in Gaza. Listen, I'm kind of on the Israelis' side in a way because they're representatives as close as you can come to Western civilization and its values planted in a benighted place in the world. But I'm on the Palestinian side too. You got this alien culture that's, landed in the middle of, you know, it's impossible to end well. And Thomas Friedman, who I absolutely despise, he's that columnist for the New York Times who pretends to be a foreign policy analyst. He's a total idiot, contemptible person, always bad ideas, recycled old ideas. But he had an editorial the other day that was actually, yes, God, he actually has a brain. And he said, well, Gaza could have turned itself into a new Dubai because Dubai used to, listen, when I first went through the airport in Dubai, it was a little shitty airport and there was nothing in Dubai. I mean, it was just desert. It was nothing, nothing, nothing. It was a shithole. And
Hmm.
in 40 years, they've transformed it into something unbelievable. Well, Gaza could have done the same thing. And he makes the observation, yeah, I think they could have done that, actually.
Hmm.
Only
They could
intelligent
have.
observation he's ever made in his whole life, as far as I can determine.
Why they could have done it, but why does he argue they didn't do it?
Leadership. It
Hmm.
wasn't it, it wasn't the allowing a free market to flourish and capitalism to blossom, but it was leadership. I mean, it was, somebody that on top that directed, these primitive people in the right. No, that wasn't it. Sure, you don't want a criminal running the country, but basically all the sheikh did, or what is he? What's the name of the chap that run the emir? They're emirates. So just leave things alone, and
Yeah,
that's what happened.
yeah, and we
But
know that
Friedman doesn't see
Israel.
that. He sees that something good could have happened, but it was bad leadership.
Hmm.
But it wasn't. It was the fact that the leaders in the Emirates left things alone and kept politics out of the mixture.
Do you think that? Sorry, I'm trying to read these questions. I'm not very. It's hard to read them at the same time, and there's a lot of them coming in fast. So I don't really know how to differentiate honestly between them. There are hundreds, Doug. Um,
That's amazing.
yeah.
It's flattering, actually.
Yeah, I mean, you think that people would have something better to do on their Friday. I guess it's still morning for them for the most part.
Yeah, yeah. It's 1 o'clock for us.
Yeah. All right, let's see. I think we'll wrap it up here in just a minute, unless I see a compelling question come in here really quick.
We need a cosmic breakthrough kind of question is what we need.
We do. Somebody asked what your thoughts are on vanadium.
Vanadium?
Vanadium.
Vanadium. It's a potential battery metal, I understand, but I don't know how vanadium. I understand they want to use it for large fixed batteries,
Hmm.
but I don't know why it's especially good for that, unfortunately.
Hmm. Okay. Um, Someone asking about gold. Yeah, can't keep up with these questions. Well, actually, do you have a view on Bitcoin as of
Yeah,
now? Do you expect it to continue to go up? I mean, it's been on a pretty big upward trend this year, or last year, I should say.
listen, I'm bullish on Bitcoin. because it has all the characteristics of a good money. And the only thing that made me hesitate before 2017, when I figured it out, is that the fifth characteristic, which has to be useful for something. It can't just be. And I said, well, it's just digits. How is it useful in and of itself? You can get stuck with like a shit coin or like a doggy coin or Dogecoin, which I understand it has no use whatsoever for anything, but people buy and sell it, and because they've got too much money and too much time. So I thought, well, but no, it's a transfer mechanism, and it's well accepted. It's actually just I think it's a good form of money, and it's digital. And it actually has some advantages over gold. Gold has advantage. So yeah, it's something. Yeah, I'm all for Bitcoin. Don't know what it's going to do tomorrow or next week or next year, but there's going to be a continuing. People will move out of the dollar into this thing which has become accepted, fixed supply. Yeah, it's going up.
Yep.
I like it because you can cross borders and transfer money at de minimis cost, but cross borders with your assets. And you can't, it's hard to do with gold. You have
It
your
is hard.
gold here, getting it to
Yeah.
someplace else.
I mean, I think what became obvious to me that fifth characteristic as you talked about was, I think it was in 2016, there was one of the complaints about Bitcoin was that so much of the network traffic was from China. And so they assumed it was fraudulent in some way. But China passed some new laws that basically made it harder for people to get capital out of the country. And so what you saw was that the Chinese were using it as a mechanism to evade capital controls. And as soon as I saw that, it was obvious where its value was. If it allows rich people to move money across borders, maybe it didn't as of yet, allow people to buy a cup of coffee because, it was transactions costs were too high. So it didn't fill that need exactly, but it certainly did allow really rich people to transfer their value across borders, evade these currency controls. I thought it was great. Made sense to
Yep,
me.
yep, yep, absolutely. I mean, Marco Witzer, of course, is big in these other frankly, I don't know.
It's hard to keep up with and
It
even
is.
know. Yeah, because it's almost like it's like biotech stuff. A lot of it's theoretical, might work, might not work, but if it did, it could be cool. So I understand
Yeah,
it. I understand the interest in it.
yeah, but you just don't know if this particular thing is going to work or not. So
Yeah. But as a reserve asset, with like Michael Saylor, putting it on his balance sheet, and they've, now made it so that the way it's treated and, accounting is more favorable so that more companies could have some on the balance sheet. I mean, it certainly makes me wish with some of my little private companies, we bought some Bitcoin with with our treasury cash essentially, instead of keeping it in dollars. It would have been smart, really smart. So
yeah, 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 I completely agree. And the world is still, with 8 billion people in the world, not all of them have a smartphone quite yet. And as more of them get smartphones, yeah, they'll discover Bitcoin, and they're not going to want to use kwaches or dirhams or these other completely fictional, worthless currencies. And
yeah,
yeah,
as I we're talking about it, there are a lot of people complaining about a lot of people point out the bad parts of Bitcoin, but one of the things that people often say, well, it's dependent upon the electric grid, and the electric grid goes down, or it could be monitored, it could be a psyop, it could be, and I think that, your approach to these kinds of things is that it's a you're not betting the farm on any one of these things to work, or Bitcoin to be the future. You're not taking all of your wealth and putting it in Bitcoin and just going, this is what I'm doing. It's a hedge, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, you should have enough money in Bitcoin. It depends on how much what your asset position is. Are you worth 10,000, 100,000, 10 million, whatever, pick a number and adjust it accordingly. And if possible, you want enough in Bitcoin so that you're not going to be living under a bridge if something bad happens and you have to go someplace else. So that's the answer.
Same view toward gold, right?
Pretty much, because gold is not, at this point, a great speculation. I mean, it's kind of reasonably priced where it is. And
people hate when you say that.
Huh?
People hate when you say that.
I know. They all want to hear that it's being artificially suppressed by this is a completely nonsense argument that's been promoted. And, yeah, gold is not a speculation. It's a savings vehicle. And at this point, I view Bitcoin as a way to save and accumulate wealth in a pretty safe way. And if you want to speculate, you can buy gold mining stocks, or there are a number of Bitcoin mining stocks. And Nick Giambruno, really keeps track of this stuff. And he believes that if there's a panic into Bitcoin, maybe that these Bitcoin mining stocks will go way, way up like gold mining stocks do when gold goes up. So yeah.
Right. Like they did in 2017, right? The Bitcoin mining stocks went crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. They all went 10, 20 to 1, something on that order.
Yeah.
So it can definitely happen again, just like has happened many times in the past with gold stocks as a group as well. But gold and Bitcoin savings vehicles, not speculative vehicles at this point, I don't think.
Yeah. A lot more people saying, Bitcoin or gold is manipulated and Bitcoin is speculation. And
I know.
what's the one question I've had, I was watching something today on the history of US the monetary system in the US, and they were talking about this bimetal period, and then they were trying to the free silver period and the ratio of gold and silver, and that they were trying to get it in law that that the fix the 16 to essentially the rate. And people often say that the gold silver ratio is a sign of something, and that silver is deeply underpriced because the ratio is X. What do you think about all that stuff, about this ratio between gold and silver?
I don't think it makes any sense, because as best as we can tell, in Egypt, ancient Egypt, the ratio between gold and silver was like 2 or 3 to 1. And then what was it in Rome? The difference before the denarius, when they had the denarius and the aureus, and the two of them were both out there. What was the ratio? And then they had the sestertius, which was a bronze coin. So what was the ratio between them? I should know, but I don't. Anyway, these things vary with technology. How much silver is basically, sure, you can use copper as a money too. But so now it's what, 80, 90 to 1, something like that, the ratio between gold and silver. I don't know. Why don't we keep track instead of the difference between copper and soybeans? I mean, that always changes. Or how about the ratio, if you want, between, we can keep trace between oil and platinum. I mean, the ratios between all these commodities are always moving. So
there's nothing to that. There's nothing to it.
I don't think there is. I think it's interesting, worthwhile knowing, observing, thinking about. Maybe you can come to help you draw a conclusion as to whether something is really expensive or really cheap. Definitive, but indicative. So, but no, there's no manipulation. Yes, they manipulate from day to day in the commodity markets. If you can scalp a few points here, or if you see where a whole bunch of the retail public has put in stops, you can take them out and make a few more points. Yeah, that's manipulation. Sure, nothing wrong with that. But on a large scale, it's ridiculous. I mean, how stupid? Well, they're very stupid. But how stupid is the US government trying to suppress the price of gold? They don't believe in gold. I mean, so why do they want to bother? And uh, and it's just making it cheaper for the Russians and the Indians and the Chinese central banks to buy it. So why do they want to do them a favor? By
Exactly.
it's I don't think people think this stuff out. Hey, maybe I'm wrong. Okay.
Yeah, and people use like, well, those JP Morgan traders are in prison now, so don't say they don't manipulate the price. It's like, yeah, they were like doing phantom orders, phantom sell orders and buy orders in order to do it. I mean, it's total of like $10 million worth of trades or something. It's
Yeah.
totally inconsequential.
Yeah. It is inconsequential. And if you're worried about it, just stay out of the markets. Or if you know what's going to happen, if you're so sure of these things, well, play the other side of it, or play their side of it, or whatever. Just people are always looking for an excuse for their own personal failures. And
Exactly. Exactly. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it here for today, Doug. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. We'll try it again maybe sometime. And yeah, Doug, I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
yeah, thanks, Matt. I can't wait to see what happens over the weekend and next week. It's like watching a slow motion soap opera. The
It's
world.
interesting. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay. Have a good one.
All right. Thanks, Doug. Okay.